Welcome to Mission Majjhima. Ajahn.
Ajahn.
Ajahn, so tell us about the Majjhima Nikaya 18, the Madhupiṇḍika Sutta.
So the Madhupiṇḍika Sutta, the Honeyball Sutta, is a sutta which is given its name. The Buddha gives it its name and request to Ananda because this sutta Ananda feels, tastes good anywhere that you approach it. So it's a really, for someone who delights in very clear expositions, you'll love this sutta. So there are basically 4 scenes that the Buddha takes us through. First, the Buddha's out meditating, and a brahmin named Dandapani, or stick in hand, comes and, in somewhat of a disrespectful manner, asks the Buddha what he teaches. And the Buddha just gives a great response, which is, "Friend, I assert and proclaim my teaching in such a way that one does not quarrel with anyone in the world, with its gods, its maras, and its brahmins, in this generation, with its recluses and brahmins, its princes and people, in such a way that perceptions no more underlie that brahmin who abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, shorn of worry, free from craving for any kind of being." So, and, saying that he teaches in a way that someone can't argue with. Dandapani is, rather flummoxed. He shakes his head and sticks out his tongue and scrunches up his forehead. And then the Buddha goes back, tells the monks this, and one monk in particular then asks for clarification. What did you actually mean by this? And the Buddha then responds, "Bhikkhu, as to the source through which perceptions and notions born of mental proliferation, papancha, beset a person, if nothing is found there to delight in, welcome, and hold to, this is the end of underlying tendency to lust, aversion, views, doubt, conceit, desire for existence, and ignorance. This is the end of resorting to rods and weapons, of quarrels, brawls, disputes, recrimination, malicious words, and false speech. Here these evil and wholesome states cease without remainder." So then the monks heard that. Well, right after that, the Buddha went into seclusion, and this happens in probably a good, several dozen suttas. The Buddha gives a pithy teaching and then retreats. Then the monks go to Kaccāna. They think, who can expound this teaching, elaborate? And they go to Kaccāna. He says that you should have asked the Buddha when you were with him. And then they say, but the Buddha says you're wise. And so he gives a teaching. And his explanation of this sutta is, dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. What one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, that one mentally proliferates on, papancheti. And with what one has mentally proliferated as the source, perceptions and notions born of mental proliferation beset a person with respect to past, future, and present forms cognizable via the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, etc. And then those monks hear that and then go back to the Buddha, and he praises it, praises what Kaccāna says, and says that he would say the same thing. And then he tells Ananda that the name of the sutta can be the Honeyball. So a really deep sutta. What would you draw out of it, Ajahn?
So I think one thing I really want to draw out here is the concept of papancha, which became the traditional translation you hear often, proliferation, was first made popular or kind of put out there by Bhante Ñāṇaṇanda in his book Concept and Reality, and became a really standard translation for this idea of proliferation of ideas and just this sequence of events in dependent on eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is contact. With contact as a condition, there's feeling. What one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one proliferates on. And then the categories of proliferation assail one. And there's so much hidden in that statement. First, the fact that the personal pronoun I is absent at first. It's just the sense organs making contact, and then Vedana, the affective quality of experience, coming up. But then when perception happens, the first person pronoun arises. What one perceives, or what one feels, one perceives. And that key moment of perception, which is when you label something with the mind and all the categories and baggage and history and memories associated with that perception come into being. This person is an enemy, a friend, etc. And Bhante Nyanananda actually, he compares perception to the ring finger when he's talking about the 5 mental aggregate or mentality components of nama, because it binds you, the ring finger. And then from there, how there comes a point where papancha, where these perceptions eventually lead to papancha, and one becomes the victim of one's own creations. And that's such a fascinating teaching, and we all know how that happens very, immediately and clearly. So I think that's brilliant. And just to say one other thing is, Ajahn Thanissaro points to the fact that the Buddha says one should abandon the root of all proliferation, root of all proliferations, the conceit, I am the thinker. So Ajahn Thanissaro really points papancha, or translates it as objectification, because he says it's intrinsically associated with this conceit of I am at the root of it all. So Ajahn, what else did you find interesting or worth mentioning in this?
Similar to you, I was inspired by when the Buddha, how the Buddha responds to people. And it reminded me of Anguttara 7.61, a very famous sutta on dozing, Pachalaya Sutta, where the Buddha is giving advice to Mahamoggallana before he attains enlightenment, where the Buddha, in addition to giving advice about not falling asleep in meditation, getting over kind of dullness in meditation, he gives this advice. This is how you should train yourselves. We will not speak contentious speech. That is how you should train yourself. For one who speaks contentiously, there will be expected to be a lot of talk. When there's a lot of talk, there's restlessness. When there's restlessness, there's lack of restraint. And an unrestrained mind is far from concentration. So that's the reason why the Buddha advocates for not speaking contentiously. And that's just a great metric. There's another sutta, Samyutta 22.94 on flowers, where the Buddha says that I do not dispute or contend with anyone in the world. The world contends with me. So it's just a totally very different approach to America's debate clubs and just the fetishization of just contentiousness and always having to have a view and have an opinion and be willing to assert how that's right. So
that's a great thing to point out, yeah.
And Ajahn, anything else? It's a big sutta.
So yeah, I don't think we're going to get nearly through all the things we should in this sutta. But one interesting thing to point to is at the end, the Buddha says, when there's no contact, it is impossible to delineate the delineation. And what's so fascinating there is it's a very artificial phrase, and it goes through each of the links, like delineate the delineation. And it, I think, points to the constructed nature of these papanchas, which we engage in and run with. And just to note that how much work it takes to build a proliferation and how much energy to keep it going. So when anger arises, how we feed the papancha, the proliferation of they did this and that and how could they, and how much we have to keep feeding it to keep it going, and how much suffering there is in that and how it assails us. So I think that's very useful to point to and to speak about tracing back the radiance, as Ajahn Ramro talks about it, which is in meditation when you find yourself way off on some fantasy, like see if you can go through all the steps of thought that got you there to the initial sense contact, which kicked off the proliferation. It's a very useful exercise. So, Ajahn, what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is papancha, which means mental proliferation, mental expansion, and just spinning outness. Comes from just the increase of punch is the root, which means expansion or just spreading out.